Okay, guys, good morning. Thank you so much for being up. We have just about 2.5 minutes, and then we'll get the lecture started today. But for now, welcome back, and good to see you guys. Feel free to say hi anytime. Good morning, Violetta. Hey there. Hey, Daniel, Monica, Nicole, Andres. Hope you guys are doing good. Caleb, Sky, John, Tucker, Delilah, Jesse, Ashley, welcome back, guys. Just have about another minute. Hey, Veronica, good morning to you too. Hey there, Roheen, Ryan, Johnny, hey. So, all right, guys, it's 8:30. I'm going to let things get started now. Welcome back. Thank you for taking the quiz on Tuesday morning on science. I'll be working through the weekend to finish that, and then also the third homework that you recently submitted. And those should be all ready to go pretty soon, and then I'll be able to notify you that you can check in for your grades on those assignments or on anything else, or your overall grade, whatever. So I should be done with that by the end of the weekend. So just look for my message to you coming out sometime this weekend. Yeah. And hi, Ashley. Good morning to you. Hi, Yelka, Ghazi, and everybody else. So today what we're doing is we're going to start on to the last chapter that we'll study in this class. We've come close to the end, obviously. We don't have much more left. There's only 2 things left for you to do in this class. And one of the things will be a homework assignment, and then, of course, the final. So there's one last homework, which I'm going to give you instructions for later today after I'm done teaching. I teach today until 3:45, so I might send off the notification a little later after that. But basically, while we're here together for now, I'll just tell you a few things about it, and this will be more detailed in the written instructions to follow. But your 4th homework assignment is basically going to be a critical analysis of news media. So what I will ask you guys to do is to sit down and view 30 minutes of a televised news broadcast. So you just basically have to watch the news, some kind of news channel or news show for 30 minutes at minimum. And what you're going to have to do is, while you're watching it, have a, well, first of all, you're going to have to create a document, and the document's going to just tell me what channel you watched, what time it was, what the show name is, and the date. So you're going to give me station, name of television show, and date and time that it aired. And then you're going to watch the 30 minutes, obviously. I want you to keep a time measurement device, like a stopwatch. And I want you to keep time of how long each story is being presented for. So basically you're going to have a timekeeping device, and you're going to itemize a list of all the stories that were presented within the 30-minute window that you viewed the news show. So you'll have to create this list, and you'll just write a one-sentence little brief blurb about what the story was about, and you'll also include the time signature in terms of minutes and seconds. So you want to be precise about those times. After that, after you just have the basic identifying information, what the channel was, what the show was, what time it aired, how long each story ran, then you'll try to write a 2 to 3 page paper which gives a critical analysis of the media report overall. So what you're going to try and do in that written report is to find areas of critique. You're going to try to spot fallacies, rhetoric, misleading editing tactics, anything that shapes the viewer's experience. You should take note of that. So you're basically trying to find commentary and criticism of any of the content or quality or news value of the broadcast. So if it's easier for you to find something to be critical of, if it's like a more partisan news channel, then you might think about that. But it's really up to you. I've assigned this thing many times, and sometimes students will just use the local news, like Channel 7 news at 8 p.m. or whatever. Sometimes people use cable news, but I pretty much leave it to you. My intention and goal is for you to use television news of some kind. In a few cases, I've seen students that have had difficulty having access to TV news. Some people, I guess, don't have TVs or watch everything on the internet. So if that is the case for any individual student, just contact me and let me know. And it could possibly be okay to use like a rebroadcasted TV news show that's been uploaded to like a YouTube channel. Sometimes the news channels themselves will, keep their own content on their own dedicated YouTube channel or streaming service, and you can go there to view some of them as well if you can't see it on TV. But the main important things are to document the list of news stories that were shown, including the time given to each one, and then to write this critical report of 2 pages. So in the schedule of dates on the calendar, this was supposed to be due on, let me get it here, Tuesday, May 11th. Right now it's Thursday, April 29th. I think all I'm going to do is just make a slight edit to that and push it to the next available day, so you can have it in anytime by the end of the day, Wednesday, May 12th, before midnight. So that'll be it. And there will be some directions given to you later today, so you can look at those for any kind of guidance or details. So anyway, that's the last homework assignment, and then you'll just have the final exam. So we are getting close to the end, and I'm just trying to update you on what the last homework assignment will kind of be like. In terms of keeping these time signatures for each story, that's something that you could also comment on when you write the news analysis, because many people have noticed that sometimes, especially with like local news shows, more time is allotted for perhaps less impactful or consequential stories about like policy matters. So you'll see that a lot of time is given to like celebrity gossip, sports, the weather, and comparatively less time given to actual issues that impact the life and status quo of citizens and people around the world. So, just try your best to be critical. If you find fallacies, rhetoric, if you could apply any of the course concepts to your critical analysis, then that'll improve, the quality of your submission. So just try to integrate the things that you've learned in the class into your analysis, and you should be good to go. But that's the 4th homework assignment, and it will be due Wednesday, May 12th. So that gives you, about 13 days from now to work on it. So hopefully that's all clear. As usual, when we're on these meetings, anytime, feel free to jump in and ask any questions or comments or whatever it may be. But we're just letting you know as we start today's meeting about that little item. Okay, and so from here, we're going to start talking about Chapter 9, a new chapter and the last chapter that we'll study. After we finish that, we will have some review sessions to get ready for the final, and I'll give you a study guide for that, and then we'll just take the test and be done with the spring semester here. One thing that happened this weekend to me, which for a little frustrating, a little bit of an annoying thing, was that, can you believe this? Someone broke into my car, right? So somebody actually, where it was parked, in a in a designated stall where it was parked, where it's supposed to be. Somebody somehow got over there and they broke in the back driver's side windows. This is like a 4-door car. So the the driver's rear side, they broke that window out. And what did they do? They came in to get, like, I had a nice guitar in there. So I think that's probably why they thought, you know, I should break into the car. They could see it. It was inside its case, but yeah, they took it out. So that was a hassle. I had to deal with that. That was like late Sunday night. My neighbor just called me as I was getting ready to go to bed, and he was like, hey, I'm over here in the garage, and I could see someone broke into your car, so you should come down. Anyway, I had to deal with that. I filed the police report, and it's all right because I have insurance. I have insurance for the vandalism to the car and homeowner's insurance for the stolen items. So it's all being replaced through the insurer, giving me a check for the guitar for the full value. And then also the car, I have to pay a small deductible for the window, but most of it is covered by my car insurance. So yeah, you know, things happen in life, little setbacks and stuff, but it didn't really affect me too much aside from the hassle of having to deal with it the day of and then the next day. But yeah, it's all good. Here's a reminder, a little word to the wise. When you have valuables, people have always told me this. They're like, don't leave it just sitting in the car. And I've always thought, okay, well, maybe that's a little bit of paranoia. I mean, who's going to really break the window and take a risk on, you know, committing such a crime? But it can happen. And now I guess I've learned my lesson. So I will definitely bring that guitar in and stash it in my house from now on. But anyway, live and learn. But it's all good. So just back to the lessons here. That's just a separate note so that you guys understand some of the things that, you know, we all deal with. But anyway, it's all right. Let's go ahead. Let's talk about, and thanks for your sympathies and everything. I appreciate that. Oh, you just got rear-ended the other day? Well, see, there you go, Jesse. You understand that, you know, anything that happens with your property, your car, it's always annoying. I would have liked to have had a rental, but I guess the insurance didn't cover it for the case of vandalism, only for like a car malfunction. So yeah, I'm using some friends to help me around without it, well, for a few days. But all right, guys, let's continue. We're now on to the last big chapter we'll study, and it's chapter 9 from the book. So chapter 9 is all about the topic of ethics. Okay, ethics. And maybe this is a word that's somewhere there in your vocabulary. I bet you it is. And let me just start by touching base with you, where your head is at when you think of the word ethics. Suppose that you had like a, you know, bright, curious, young, little elementary school student that's like a sibling or somebody that you know, one of your siblings' friends, whatever. And they ask you about that. They say, hey, I saw this word ethics. I have no idea what it means. Can you tell me? Now you're the adult. They're asking you, what would you say to them? What is ethics? Do you have any idea? Or if you even have a vague idea, how would you put it? Some of you, I figure, have an existing concept of ethics. What do you think is ethics? And that's where we'll go from there. Ethics, what could it be? Because that's our topic. So just sort of setting the table on the topic here. What do you think it's about? I mean, I will tell you, obviously, but just seeing what you think. I'll never know unless you tell me. It's got to get out of your head and onto the keyboard. Okay, Violetta, set of moral principles. I mean, that's pretty good. You seem to know a lot about it. So it does have to do with moral principles, and that's a good starting place to sort of touch base from. Anybody else, though? I mean, we got what, like 33 students, and none of you guys even have any thoughts about ethics? Come on. You're very brave, but it's not that, you know, outrageous to just say what you think ethics means. Caleb, moral principles that govern a person's behavior. Okay, very good. Veronica, something you decide that's either right or wrong. Okay, very good. So let me kind of bring these different comments together and show you what they kind of have in common. Ethics is all about the theoretical study of morality. Okay, it's all about morality. What is moral, immoral, good, bad, right, wrong? So that's what it is. Morality. So whenever we're talking about whether something was right, wrong, good or bad, we're thinking in ethical terms. Sometimes we are subject to the moral judgments of others. Not to worry. Hey, AJ, good to see you. Sometimes we do things and people criticize or judge us or praise us and commend us for, righteous and virtuous acts. Sometimes when we look at other people's behaviors or certain policies or events that can be applied to the world, we think of them as good or bad, etc. Now, I kind of wanted to expand on the topic a little bit by trying to provide a list here of some basic moral concepts that maybe we have in mind. So while we're on this discussion of ethics and morality, let's try and put down some moral concepts on the board. And so some of these you guys have already kind of mentioned a little bit, at least indirectly here in the chat. What would you say are maybe like a pair of concepts that have to do with morality, and they're like opposites? So I don't want to sort of exactly tell you just straight away, but I know that you have these ideas in mind. So like you can contrast the two sides of morality by saying that an action is either blank or blank. So like the two valences of morality. Sometimes we contrast what two sides? When we talk about moral concepts, we distinguish between actions that are blank versus blank. Can you tell me what could be a contrasting pair of moral concepts that are like polar opposites? Try to do that. Let me see. And then we'll work with a range of them here on the board. So I'm just asking you to compare or contrast two moral concepts that are like different from each other. We sometimes say of an action, policy, proposal, or behavior that it is, and this is for you, I'm waiting for you. Okay, right and wrong. There you go, Ashley, that's one. Right versus wrong. So right, correct. Sometimes an action is classified as a right action. You made a promise and it's actually quite inconvenient for you to keep it, but you do it anyway out of personal sacrifice to yourself just to keep the honor of the promise, and someone says you did the right thing. Or you broke that same promise because it would be too inconvenient for you to keep it, despite the fact that you gave your word. Now someone says that was wrong. You should not have promised if you're going to break the promise. So we can classify an act as right or wrong. What's another possible distinction that's along the same lines? So just let's kind of work through synonymous pairings here. You have right and wrong, another moral distinction, which is similar to that, but just different words. Can you give another case instead of right and wrong? Okay, good and evil, you say, Veronica. That's another one, perhaps. Evil is like such a powerful word. I almost think that it'd be better to contrast good simply with bad, because evil is almost like on another plane, of really, really wrong stuff. But I understand your thought. I almost think that if we're going to compare evil to something, we have to make the good side of it even more grand, virtuous and evil, or righteous and evil or something. But yes, good and evil, good and bad, morally good, morally bad, morally right, morally wrong. Let's try another. These are already good. How about this? I'll help you out. Well, one word is the word moral. Has anybody ever heard of the opposite of that word? What's the reverse of moral? So we can say an action is moral, or on the opposite side that it is what? Moral versus what? Okay, that's another one. Good, Ashley. Thanks for that. I'll put it in just and unjust. And well, Nicole, you say non-moral. Actually, no. Slight close, but just a slight different word. Maybe we'll get it in there, because non-moral means it has nothing to do with morality. So it's not really the reverse of moral. It's just amoral. You're thinking of, what's the word? Someone will help you, or you'll get it. Immoral. Correct. Immoral. Okay, so let me put those here too. Just and unjust. Moral versus immoral. Yeah, so sometimes when we observe behavior, actions, decisions that people take, we think that they did the moral thing, or they did something that was immoral. Somebody cheats on their partner or whatever, and they're married, and you know, the partner really loves them and cares about them, would never expect that. You know, you could say, oh, that was immoral. Somebody goes and works as a volunteer, like at a homeless shelter, or as a nurse orderly to assist people that are sick, and we say that was good. You know, they really did something righteous and moral. Sometimes we discuss behavior and actions or even policies in terms of whether they're just or whether they're unjust. Sometimes we say when justice is done, this is morally good, or when an injustice is perpetrated, this is something wrong. And Caleb, you say, would bad versus evil work? I often wonder how bad someone can be until they are evil. Well, I don't know. I don't disagree with you, Caleb. All I would say, though, is to kind of keep things clear, I'm trying to keep the valence on one side positive and on the other side negative. Bad versus evil are both, you know, negative. And I think you make a reasonable point that it's a question, isn't it? At what time does bad behavior slip into straight up evil behavior? It seems to me that it's a gray area distinction. It's kind of hard to make a precise delineation of when it would slide into that next tier, I guess, of immorality. But yeah, I think sometimes maybe it could be, I mean, this is just me thinking off the top of my head, but bad behavior might just be when you lapse away from your moral principles, but evil is like when you're committed to bad behavior, like you believe in it as though you have like a kind of inverted moral perspective, like you want to do wrong things as opposed to being tempted to do them occasionally or whatever. But anyway, very interesting thoughts and questions. Let me add one last thing. Since morality is all about what people do and the actions that they do, we can also label or provide the case of what one ought to do morally versus what one ought to not do. Okay, so looking at this just list of things on the board, I'm simply trying to stimulate your thoughts on the topic. I'm trying to get you to kind of recognize what we're now discussing. We're talking about morality, and these like cluster of concepts kind of fill in the space of what morality is about, what ethics is all about. So whenever you hear someone talking about ethics or morality, they are talking about what people should do, what they shouldn't do, what is right to do, wrong, good, bad, just, unjust, moral, immoral, virtuous, vicious, etc. Now, in the world of ethics, you might think, well, isn't that just every different person's subjective perspective on it, like how they grew up, what values they were instilled with, and there's no fact about it, it's just kind of a subjective thing. Some believe that. That's called moral relativism. But many others, especially a lot of the academics and philosophers that study the topic, believe that there's something objective about morality, that there's like a moral code or a moral law that we can discover, which is given to us somehow either through reason, which is either natural or like divinely endowed upon us, or sometimes people believe God creates the moral rules. But whatever the case is, there are some views that morality is objective and some that think it is just subjective and individual. In ethics, there's three major types of actions that are often discussed. So there's three big categories of moral action, and that's what I want to put up here next. So let me go over that. Okay, so there's three big categories here. One, which I'll start with, is actions that are classified as morally impermissible. Morally impermissible actions. Okay, so what's this definition? What does that mean? A morally impermissible act is simply an act that is, in some sense, to be defined as wrong. It's morally wrong. So these are morally wrong actions, and to be like maybe even less formal about it, they are things that are not okay to do. So actions that are wrong, in the moral sense of being wrong, actions that are wrong and just in general, they are not okay to do. Okay. Now, we're going to continue with the other two as well, but let's take it step by step. And with morally impermissible actions, based on the definition there, now I'm going to get you guys to involve yourselves. What do you think could be like some fair examples that you would be willing to put out there of something that's a morally impermissible act? Like, you know, think about things that people can do. A lot of them, this is going to be bad things, not so nice. But things that if a person did it, you would say, that's wrong. And even though they did it, it wasn't okay. So what could be some clear examples maybe of morally impermissible actions? There's some things that are bad and wrong. Okay, so stealing, there's one, Yelka. I definitely have gained some more experience with that over the weekend, getting my car broken into and getting my nice Telecaster guitar stolen. I mean, that's a $1,500 guitar we're talking about. This is like a really nice black sunburst American Telecaster Fender. So, but anyway, yeah, stealing is wrong. You know, to take something that is not yours without any permission from the actual owner of the property or item is wrong. It's a transfer of ownership without the permission of the current owner. And since possessions are derived from your labor and income, it certainly takes away from someone something that you have no right to take. So that's one case. Could there ever be an exception to stealing being wrong? You know, we could imagine perhaps like a person is stealing simply because they're trying to feed their dying child or something and they're that poor. Maybe some could grant exceptions, but overall, yeah, we don't think of morally that stealing is appropriate or approved. Murder, okay, Violetta, very good. I mean, that's definitely way up there on the scale of how bad an act could be. Murder, to end the life of a person without proper cause, not in self-defense, usually an innocent person. I mean, that's certainly one of the gravest immoral acts that you could perpetrate, since life is so precious and human life is that valuable. So to snuff out and destroy human life unnecessarily of an innocent person, that's one of the worst things. And that's a clear case also. Lying, okay, Nicole. Certainly lying is often regarded as one of the moral impermissible acts. Even in some of, you know, the famous scriptures of the Bible that many people use in the West as like a moral compass. It says, thou shalt not lie, steal, and other things of that kind. You know, lying though, I guess I can possibly imagine, you guys probably agree that sometimes perhaps there are little white lies that don't necessarily strike you as immoral. Like what if somebody asked you, how do you like my outfit? And you actually think that it's really tacky and looks terrible, but you want to make them feel good. So you say, oh, you're looking great. Or they ask you, how is this meal that I cooked? And you thought it was disgusting, but you don't want to hurt their feelings, so you tell them something that's different from what you really feel. Is this a lie? Of a kind, but it might not be the one that we find fault with. But for the most part, yes, we expect people to tell the truth. We rely on people to be honest and to say what's real. So for sure, lying is often and generally regarded as a morally impermissible act. Going behind someone's trust, yeah, so you can say violating a promise. That would be a special case of the thing both Gabriel and Ashley mentioned here. If you make a promise in the context of marriage, for example, then certainly you vow to remain faithful to the person. But even in you know, premarital, steady, solid relationship, people have an expectation usually of monogamy. Now, did you say, Yelka, rape is certainly a clear case? I don't know if you had it and then deleted it, but anything that's not consensual, and rape would, of course, be one of the most horrifying and wrong acts. There's actually, I don't think, any possible moral justification for the act of rape, non-consensual sex with another partner that, you know, doesn't consent to it. This is a violation of their bodily autonomy, taking away the choice they have to control what happens with and to their body in such an intimate way is certainly one of the worst things you could do. So good, we, I think, have a clear understanding in general of the kind of actions that would fill the space of this definition. So it's a whole bunch of bad stuff: murder, lying, cheating, stealing, violating vows, and so on. So unfortunately, there's a lot of morally impermissible actions. We try to get people to not do those things, but people have their own motives, and sometimes they'll do them regardless of those imperatives and those moral guidelines. Now, on the opposite side, though, it's not all doom and gloom. There's also morally permissible actions. So that's the second category. By the way, we could have even added, like, there's even more, you know, great, like genocide, Holocaust. I mean, you could go further and further up the scale. and then all the way down to like little private acts of lying that maybe don't have such consequence, but they're all, let's say, on the wrong side of morality, so they are all in this camp. But then you have morally permissible actions. So based off this definition, you know this is the reverse. So what do you think this definition would be? If impermissible acts are wrong and not okay to do, then what are permissible acts, you think? What would be the definition there? So what do you think? Morally permissible. Just look, using your logical reasoning and common sense, I think you can just kind of gauge what this should say, because it's the reverse or the converse of the above definition. So what do you think it means for an act to be morally permissible instead of impermissible? Impermissible means like not permitted, no permission given by morality to do this. Well, okay, Gabriel, that's fine, but you're giving an example, and we'll get to those. Very good. But I first want the definition. So these are actions that, Nicole, you say that are right and that are okay to do. And that's also what Violetta and Delilah have written as well. Pretty much, yes. There's only one slight little edit I'd want to make to that, if that's okay. Because you employ the terminology of right, as I can understand, because right is the natural core opposite of wrong. But I would rather put it a little more minimally, and here's why. Because when you say the word right, I think it draws into your mind thoughts of doing something really noble and virtuous, maybe that's even involves self-sacrifice. And yes, those are morally permissible actions. But it's not limited to such acts that are valorous and noble. It's also morally permissible to do all kinds of little daily things that don't necessarily promote anybody's like huge benefit or self-interest, but they're also not wrong in the sense that you could be morally blamed for them. So I would rather put it a little more minimally and say it this way. These are simply actions that are not wrong. And yes, they are okay to do. So now, in line with Gabriel, your comment, let's try and give some examples. What do you think are cases of morally permissible actions? Now, one you've already expressed is getting someone who's feeling down a gift. So someone's down bad, they just got their car broken into, and you're going to get them a nice gift. But yes, that's nothing wrong with that. If you give someone a nice gift, you bestow a benefit upon them to just show kindness. Nobody's going to say to you, "What are you doing? That's evil. This is immoral." Of course, it's not immoral. So that's fine. That's okay, and that's not wrong. But it's not the only thing in the world that's not wrong. So let's try and give a few more examples if we can here. And I'll say this. I always make this little joke. That I think it should be pretty easy for you to come up with such examples, because look at your own life. You're a good person, right? So probably almost 95% plus of what you do is in this category, because you usually don't do wrong things, right? So just think about random things that you're doing that are not wrong. Taking someone out to lunch. Okay, that's also fine, Nicole. You're going to sponsor their lunch, give them a little bit of a freebie so that they can enjoy it and not pay. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. Compliments, giving someone a compliment. Fine, that's also not wrong. I wouldn't think so. I guess in the wrong context, you're giving a person a compliment in a professional setting on something that has nothing to do with what they're talking about. I can imagine somebody being a little awkward about it, but for the most part, yes, it's a good thing to give compliments, and people like those. Acknowledging someone's effort, fair enough. How about something self-regarding that's morally permissible, that doesn't have to do with engaged with another person? How about this? Because compliments, acknowledging someone, giving someone a gift, that's all directed at another person. Can you tell me something that you could do by yourself that's morally permissible? Well, we have helping someone, and that's fine too. Opening the door for someone, sure, not a problem. Giving someone a ride home, okay. But you guys, I'm noticing a pattern here. What about something that's just about you, that's morally permissible? Certainly there are. Is it morally permissible to watch a lecture? I think so. So you're doing nothing wrong right now. So that's fine. Think outside the box a little bit and give me some other examples. These are all good though. That's fine. I just want to kind of make sure you guys understand that you don't necessarily have to be helping anybody for your action to, at a minimum, not be wrong. Not be wrong in the sense that you're not hurting anybody or victimizing anybody. So Studying for a test, there you go, watching a movie, correct. Those are also morally permissible acts. And now Ghazi, Nicole, and the rest, maybe you understand why I wanted to make that slight adjustment to the wording you suggested, where you say actions that are right and that are okay to do, because right makes it seem like it's really beneficial. And surely those are morally permissible, yes. But it's not only limited to that. Like if I just want to, buy myself ice cream, eat popcorn, that sort of stuff is also morally permitted. It's not wrong, and it is okay to do it. At the same time, Ashley, I guess, there are going to be some, if we really look at the complicated moral arguments that people make, some will argue that using animal products in general is immoral. Now, that's a debate, right? Not everyone agrees with this, and there's a whole literature on pro and con arguments. I'm just trying to make you think about how complex some of this stuff could be. So anyway, for you to think about what's morally permissible, you just have to think about things that don't have any kind of moral blameworthiness attached to them. So it could be like giving service, giving time, giving money, giving to charity, giving blood, whatever. But it could also just be minding your own business in a way that doesn't affect anyone else negatively. If I tonight in my apartment want to, normally I would always sleep in the bedroom like anybody. But what if I wanted to roll out a mat into the kitchen and sleep next to the fridge overnight? Am I morally permitted to do that, do you think? Sure. Because it is my apartment and it's not going to hurt anybody if I do this. It's a little weird. It might be an awkward and uncomfortable decision, but it's not anything that's morally wrong. If I want to walk down the street wearing a chicken suit, that's certainly a strange fashion choice, but you can't really say that it's immoral or that I'm doing something evil, wicked, or malicious. So some morally permissible acts benefit other people, and we think of them as noble and virtuous, yes. But some morally permissible acts just are self-regarding, and they don't disadvantage other people, so therefore, even if they don't create a benefit, they're also permitted morally. There's all kinds of strange things that I could do that I guess I would have the moral permission to do. You see this watch that I'm wearing? What if I took it off right now and just smashed it with a hammer? I guess I have moral permission to do this as well because it is my property, even though it wouldn't be beneficial to anyone, not even to me. So some of the morally permitted acts are not necessarily, all things considered, good decisions, but they're also not like immoral decisions. Okay, so then we continue to the next, and one more, the acts that are called morally obligatory. Okay, morally impermissible, morally permissible, morally obligatory. So based on the wording itself, you might have at least a general idea. What do you think morally obligatory actions mean? These are actions that it goes beyond just being permitted. With permission, moral permitted acts, you may do so. But with a morally obligatory act, what do you think is the difference? It's a little bit stronger than just being permissible. Over and beyond being permissible, if it's morally obligatory, then what would you say that means based off of the wording of obligation or obligatory? A morally obligatory act is an action that you must do. That's right. It's something that you must do. So whereas these are like morally optional, these are like morally mandatory. Okay, so morally required acts. So these are acts that you must do, and it would actually be wrong and not okay not to do them. Wrong not to do. Okay, so now that we got to morally obligatory actions, let's see if we can come up with examples yet again. These are perhaps a little trickier at first to think of because we all know a bunch of stuff that you may do morally, but we don't feel like you're necessarily obligated to do it, right? So if I say giving to charity, that's certainly a fine thing. It's not wrong. But probably you don't think that you have a certain obligation to give to charity either. But let's see if you could come up with anything that you do think would be considered a moral obligation. So morally obligatory action. This is something that if you didn't do it, that would be wrong. It's something that's obligated on you. So what could that be? It's okay to struggle a little bit and have some awkward examples, but let's try our best and see. Okay, there you go, Violetta, paying the bill. That's a good example, actually. So if you, say, sit down at a restaurant and you eat the food and you take the product from the vendor, then you have a moral obligation to provide compensation for the service. It's not really up to you to decide, well, I'm going to dine and dash, and if I do that, that's permitted. So yes, you're permitted to pay the bill, but you're obligated to pay the bill too. It would be wrong not to do it. So there's one clear example, and that's good. Can we think of any others? So you say, Caleb, defend those who cannot defend themselves. I mean, it's certainly a good thing to do, but many people would say that you don't necessarily have a duty to render assistance if it comes at a risk to your own well-being or safety, right? People want to believe that they have the liberty to remain uninvolved in certain situations. So I don't know. I mean, what if there was a burning building and there's people inside crying out for you to come in and rescue them because they can't access the door, but you can from the outside? But you recognize that if you go in, you're certainly at risk for death from smoke inhalation or burns. Some people would take the extraordinary act of bravery and put their entire life and health at risk to go in and do that. And of course, we would commend them for doing something amazingly good. But if somebody didn't do it because they were afraid for their life, I'm not so sure that we would be prepared to say that they did something immoral because of the risks borne by the act. So I'm just saying it's a little bit of a gray area case, I would argue there, Caleb. Certainly to assist those in need is valorous and noble, but are we really prepared to say that it's a strict obligation? Because if it is, then bystanders to a scene where there's some danger that they could intervene in are all doing something wrong. And maybe you're right about that, but it's, I think, a little more of a debatable point. At least not all sides 100% agree on it, but it's a good question. Now, Veronica, taking care of your children if you have them, I would say so, yes, this is a good example. As a philosopher, just know that I will always try to think of any tricky counterexamples. This is just part of my training, right? So let me go into your example now, Veronica. If you have children, the only exception I would think to that being an obligation to care for them and to provide for them would be if you don't really want custody of them. So some people, of course, have children as surrogates for the parents that are actually going to take custody. In other cases, people have children, don't want to have an abortion, and decide they would rather put the child up for adoption because they don't have the financial means at that time in their life to become a parent with all the obligations that brings. So anyway, though, what I would say, if you take in your child and you have the full intent to remain the custodian of these children, then at that point, yes, you have a full moral obligation to care for them and certainly not to abuse them. That's true, Nicole. In line with what you said here, Nicole, this is a good point to make a quick note. There's a logical connection between these two categories, okay? And here's what I mean. Since what's impermissible is wrong to do, you're morally obligated not to do any of these things, okay? So since like murder, for example, is morally impermissible, you have a moral obligation to what? To not do that. So you have a moral obligation to not murder people because it's morally impermissible to do that. Likewise, if you don't do what you're morally obligated to do, so like if you don't pay the bill and that was an obligation, then that's impermissible. So not doing your obligations is wrong, and not doing what is wrong is an obligation. So that's exactly right then, Nicole. If abusing one's children is morally impermissible, then you have a moral obligation not to do it. And you would also have a moral obligation to not do any of these bad things, like not steal, not lie, not cheat, or whatever. Cam, you say voting. And certainly it's a civic duty to vote. I mean, if people did not vote in general, then what? We would not have any input into our political leadership or laws, and that would really erode democracy and the health of our government and society. So surely voting is important and it's a civic duty, but is it a strict moral obligation? I mean, some people out there have all kinds of skepticism about whether the elections really bring about change. Some people are quite cynical and they think that both parties are equally destitute of ideas or whatever. So some people will say, oh, voting is just a sort of charade. I don't share in that cynicism at all, but I'm just trying to tell you about how there would be some individuals out there that would have like a principled stand that would say, I refuse to vote because I think that democracy is a sham or whatever. So to those people, they may disagree with you, but me and you agree that you do have a moral and civic duty to vote. I'm just trying to give voice to like the possible counterpoints that some may raise. At any rate, now that we've gone through this little list, I want to make another quick point about morality and the difference between morality and law. okay? Because a lot of times when you're first talking to people about the concept of ethics and the study of morality, a lot of people just jump really quick to the assumption that, well, the law determines what's right and wrong. So whatever the law says is illegal, that's immoral. And whatever the law says is legally permitted, that's moral. But this is not true. There is an obvious difference between law and morality, because it's possible for laws to themselves be immoral. And if that's the case, then it's an unjust law and it's on the wrong side of morality itself. So we cannot necessarily identify every single law with what's moral. And to make this clear, let's think of some examples. Can anybody think of any kind of system or institution that was at least at some time legal, but, you know, to any reasonable moral person, this was always wrong, even when the law said that it was okay to do? Can you think of anything, a practice, institution, or such that was, you know, embodied in the law as a legal thing, but at least with the benefit of hindsight, if nothing else, we can say this was certainly wrong, even if it was legal? Can you think of anything that was legal but wrong? Go ahead, let me see. Yeah, slavery. And then I guess, yeah, you separate but equal the Jim Crow laws and stuff that followed after slavery. Surely. So with slavery, I mean, we're talking about, and then, yeah, all the laws in Nazi Germany that said you can give safe harbor to Jewish people and you're supposed to turn them over to the authorities. Yeah. So you would have been breaking the law back in the days of slavery to try and, you know, escape fugitive slaves like they did in the Underground Railroad and Harriet Tubman. But those people that violated those laws were not doing anything immoral. As we all, I hope, would agree, slavery was wrong in and of itself, whether or not it was legal or not. We're talking then about people being treated as property and selling them off to others without any kind of compensation for their labor. So that's like indentured servitude, children sold away from their parents, families stripped apart as though these were just like animals that you could sell off as pets. So clearly we all, I think, agree and know that that was a stain on, you know, our historical record and, you know, the record of many other countries around the world that employed the practice. So just because it was legal, that doesn't mean that it was okay and that it was not immoral. In fact, it wouldn't even make sense to say that, oh, it only became wrong once the Constitution was changed. Because why would there have been any impetus or motive to change the law or the Constitution to forbid slavery if it was okay and not wrong while it was on the legal books? So, you know, and like sometimes, you know, young people smoking weed, smoking marijuana, you know, there's like laws, whatever, federal laws against that. But I'm sure that that doesn't make many of the people that are doing it think, well, I'm an evil person, I'm an immoral person. No, you probably would rather say that the laws themselves are antiquated, out of date, and they don't really reflect what's right and wrong for people to do in the moral sense, disregarding the legal questions. Even today, right, there's some people, I'm not one of them, but there are some people that are like really prominent pro-life advocates that are against, you know, the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court decision and the fact that in our country, abortion is federally legalized in all 50 states. Some people say, oh, abortion is immoral, and that's something that's an immoral element of our legal code. So if there was no difference between law and morality, then there would be no basis to ever critique law or to engage in civil disobedience or to agitate for the reform of laws that you think are immoral. As mentioned in the comments here, you know, if you had been giving safe harbor to Jewish people during the time period of Nazi Germany, then you would have been breaking the German laws at that time. But these laws themselves were corrupt and wrong. So if you ever feel like it's fair to criticize an existing policy or a standpoint of the government, then you have to believe that there's at least some degree of difference between the concept of law and morality. At the same time, though, I don't want you to take it in the other nihilistic direction that all the laws are just deviant from morality and we should just be like anarchists or something. No, for the most part, I would think most of our laws do reflect our shared sense of moral values. That's why we abide by them and we respect them. But as legislators are just human beings capable of instituting laws that don't reflect what we think is right and wrong, we always keep in mind the possibility of making those critiques. So when you think about morality, guys, I would rather you think about it from the standpoint not of the citizen who is subject to law, but as the legislator, him or herself, who's voting on the law. If you're, let's say, a member of Congress and a bill comes before you and it says, let's legalize marijuana, yay or nay. Now you're the person who decides whether this should be the law. And so you can't just say, well, what I vote depends on what the law says, because you're the lawmaker. Okay, so the lawmaker's standpoint is, would it be good or bad in some like independent sense of my judgment for this to be implied into the law? So when you think about morality, you have to think about it in that original sense. Even as applied to law, you should say, well, is this law something that squares with my sense of right or wrong, as the legislator would do if they were deciding whether or not to keep the law or to repeal it or whatever. So those are some points to mention as we go through our discussion of ethics. Now, when we make decisions about morality, like when we determine what we think is an impermissible or a permissible or an obligatory act, we engage in what's called moral reasoning. I want to put that definition up here, but I have one last point to say about moral obligations versus legal obligations. So you can have moral obligations that are not legally enforceable, clearly. Like, for example, making promises. Say I promise to someone that I will pick them up from the airport to give them a ride after their plane lands on Saturday at noon. So they talk to me and they say, you know, my house is kind of far from the airport and I really would like it to not have to order an Uber or Lyft. Can you maybe give me a ride? And you say to them, yeah, sure. I promise that I'll give you that ride. So you have my word, I put it on everything. I swear I'll be there. So you got my promise, I'll be there Saturday at noon to get you a ride. Now suppose they're there Saturday, it's noon, it's 12:30, now it's 1 p.m. They're wondering, where are you? Did you hit traffic? Did you forget? So they call you up and they say, hey, you're coming to get me, right? It's 1 o'clock. You said you promised me to be here at noon, just checking. And you're like, yeah, I know I promised that, but I had no intention of keeping the promise. The whole point was to get you stuck at the airport expecting a ride. Pretty funny, you're a loser, you trusted me, haha, so you hang up. Now would that be okay? No, that would be immoral. That would be a violation of a moral obligation. If you didn't want to have to go, then you shouldn't promise to go, because a promise establishes an obligation to do whatever the promise was. But was that a criminal act? Did you just break the law by breaking the promise? No, because it's not a legally enforceable contract. It's just a personal promise made on the basis of a verbal agreement between you and the other person. So it's not a violation of contract law or anything. So it's not illegal, but it's still immoral. So I'm just reminding you guys that law and morality can disentangle. Sometimes there are things that are wrong, but they're not technically a crime, like cheating on an exam or whatever. I mean, I can't call the cops on you if you do that. It's a violation of a school policy, but it's not a violation of, like, you know, the penal code or whatever. So some things are wrong, but not immoral. And some things, but not illegal, I meant to say. And some things are illegal, but not necessarily immoral, according to at least some fair-minded judgment. Okay, then. So let's go on, and we'll talk about moral reasoning briefly. And yeah, like, morality is special to human beings. It's only us. It's only this species that does this. I mean, there are other animals, of course, all throughout the world of nature, but only humans invent accountability for misconduct. You know, we have a whole, like, across the world, civil justice, criminal justice systems. So if someone steps outside of the lines or the boundaries of what we think people should or shouldn't do, we actually hold them accountable. Now, if you're in the jungle and you're an animal, it's just survival of the fittest. So if somebody, you know, if an animal is harmed, preyed upon, displaced, then there's nothing it can do to, like, secure its rights or standing in the moral community of other animals. It's just, that's it. But for humans anyway, we try to protect the weakest, right? We try to provide some measure of assurance for those against predation, against harm, and we lock people up and punish them if they don't do this. So human beings are moral creatures, really, if you think about it. And that's why we learn about this in class like this. Okay, so moral reasoning. Moral reasoning. So this is just when you make a decision about what is right or wrong, or about what you should or should not do. When you make a decision about what is right or wrong, or about what you should or should not do. in the moral sense. So when you're the moral judge and you observe an action, practice, or policy, and you say to yourself, I think it's right, or I think it's wrong, you're engaged in moral reasoning. You're reaching a moral conclusion about whether the given action or whatever is right or wrong. And when you weigh in and you make that judgment, we call it moral reasoning. And sometimes moral reasoning is not just applied to actions in society or by others that are determined to be right or wrong, but about your own behavior. You know, you're considering whether or not to turn in a plagiarized assignment. You're considering whether or not to, engage in theft that would be easy to get away with, but you're worried about the moral consequences of doing so and your own guilty conscience. You're thinking about taking a performance-enhancing drug to facilitate a better performance in a sport, even though you know it's prohibited by the rules, and there's not equity there because other people are clearly following those rules and not permitting themselves access to these controlled substances. In all these different cases, moral reasoning weighs on us. We have to make decisions about whether we think something's right or wrong or what we should or shouldn't do. And that's just the life of a human being that lives with others and is subject to these moral judgments and opinions. Now, going far back into the past, way back into ancient Greek, some of the earliest Western philosophers said that morality makes you happier. Some people don't recognize this, but there's actually some scientific studies and some empirical evidence that bears out that when you try to live according to a set of moral principles and values, you're actually more happy in the end. So it's not even completely detached from your self-interest or your own well-being or wellness to try and invest yourself in some degree of moral value. So let's then talk about the difference between moral and non-moral values. That's the next thing that the book goes through. Okay, so what are these? Two types of values: moral values versus non-moral values. Okay, so values are things that we believe in that motivate our actions and decisions. And when we're talking about moral values, these are the values that are beneficial to you and to others. So they're values that benefit you and others. And these moral values are good for their own sake. Okay, so let me give some examples, e.g., example given. You can think of altruism. Altruism, the desire to benefit other people and to do good for them. Compassion, the ability to relate to the feelings of others and to care about their feelings. Forgiveness, the ability to let things go if someone's done something wrong to you so that you can restore a mutually friendly and beneficial relationship, or perhaps just justice. Treating people equally and fairly and giving them what they deserve. These values that we listed here, forgiveness, justice, altruism, compassion, it's just a little sampling. We could have added more. But the point is that when you have these values and they cause you to act in a way that the value implies, that's a benefit. It's a benefit to other people, but also to you. And they're considered good for their own sake. So let me try to explain a little of that. Say that you value the concept of forgiveness. So you want to be a forgiving person. You don't want to hold grudges. You don't want to hold a vendetta. You don't want to hold on to feelings of resentment, anger, hostility. So, you're willing to forgive. When you show forgiveness to somebody, it certainly benefits them because instead of being just shut out from your life and a friendly relationship with you, now they can re-enter that kind of friendly and mutually beneficial relationship with you. So of course it benefits a person who's going to be forgiven. They're given a second chance. They're allowed to redeem themselves. But it's also a benefit to you too, because when you do forgive people, you no longer have to harbor these feelings of rage, anger, resentment that kind of weigh you down in life. So it lightens your mental load to be a forgiving person. So in that sense, it's a benefit to you and to the other to whom forgiveness is shown. But the last point is that it's also considered good for its own sake. And what that means is this. Occasionally, of course, sometimes having these values and showing them in your action will backfire, or at least it won't result in your own well-being or benefit. Has it ever been true that you forgive somebody and then they still stabbed you in the back again and double-crossed you again, even though you did forgive them? Yes, it can happen. So can people betray your willingness to be a forgiving person and manipulate or exploit it? Yes, that can happen. But even when it does happen, you forgave them and they did you wrong again. Even when that happens, nobody says to you, well, you're a bad person because you're forgiving, or something's wrong with you because you were forgiving. No, people still will usually praise and commend you and say, well, good on you. It was good that you're a forgiving person, that you're the bigger person, the better person. So what that somebody, didn't receive it with the right kind of reaction? It's still a good thing in and of itself, even when it doesn't necessarily lead to the productive outcome that you wanted. So usually there will be good results. But even when the use of one of these values in your action doesn't result in that, it misfires somehow or backfires, we still would think of it as a good thing in and of itself, regardless of the fact that it didn't generate some kind of utility in the end. And that's the case with the others, right? You're compassionate and you show someone that you really care, and they just treat you disrespectfully afterwards yet again. Still, though, even in those occasional cases, it was good for its own sake that you had the tendency to be compassionate. Now, these are moral values, and that's important to the life of a moral and ethical person, but there's also non-moral values, and we all have this in our life, so let's talk about them. Non-moral values are more goal-oriented. So they're more like self-centered and self-interested. These are goal-oriented values, and they're valued as a means to an end. Goal-oriented values that are a means to an end. Okay, so that means that these values, to the extent that you have them, they're only desired as a stepping stone to get to some goal that you have for yourself. So these kinds of values, as examples, are things like fame, wealth, popularity, or prestige, just to name a few. And so think about it, right? If you have the wealth, if wealth is like very valuable, like that's a value to you, to just be wealthy and to get money, then that's going to motivate a lot of your decisions. You'll make decisions out of the standpoint that you're doing it to try and secure more wealth for yourself. But why though do people want wealth? People want wealth for sure, but they want it just as a means to an end. What's the goal behind getting wealth? Well, to be happy, to be pleased. The more money you get, you feel like you're going to have more purchasing power, you have more financial security, and that'll result in your own happiness. So it's the pursuit of your own happiness that makes you want wealth, or fame, or popularity, or prestige, whatever. If you want to be famous, it's because you think that'll make you happy. And so you want these things, but not for their own sake, just for the sort of carrot that they lead to in the end, which is your own personal satisfaction and pleasure. Notice, though, that if these values did not lead to the desired outcome of happiness, then you wouldn't really care about them. Suppose that you became really famous and rich, but for whatever reason you still ended up being really depressed and you committed suicide, like even some celebrities have done and still do. Then you'd say, well, it didn't really result in what I wanted, happiness for myself. So yes, these things are desired, but they're not desired for the sake of other people's benefit. They're desired for merely your own self-serving interests. And oftentimes they will result in that. But if they don't, then it's not like you care about it for its own sake. You care about it just on the basis that it will lead to this happiness. So consider which values motivate your own desires, decisions, or even consumer purchases. The non-moral values, such as wealth, can produce happiness, but again, there's some evidence to show that they don't control your ultimate happiness. If you don't have some, at least, balance to your life, where there's moral values also involved in your beliefs and choices, then after a while, some people report that they end up feeling kind of aimless, shallow, and just kind of like lacking in depth and substance. So these moral values can actually contribute to your abiding contentment and self-satisfaction. You want to feel like you're being a good person, not merely a pleasure-seeking individual that doesn't care about anybody else. And it's also shown that better critical thinkers are more effective at careful and well-based moral reasoning. So, we've learned about how to evaluate arguments to determine whether the conclusion of the argument is true or whether it's valid based on the premises. And those skills of reasoning and deducing and inferring will be useful to you as you try and navigate the complex moral landscape and make correct and proper moral decisions too. Sometimes we make moral decisions that we don't like and that we later come to regret. Sometimes you were tempted to do something and it was wrong, and then later afterwards you kind of feel a sense of guilt even. Well, there's a word that the book uses for that called moral tragedy. And so this is the terminology of our textbook, but they say of moral tragedy that it's when you make a bad moral decision that you later regret. When you make a bad moral decision that you later regret, we could call this a moral tragedy. And what is it that tells you that it was bad? Well, a lot of times it's not just other people coming to you and being like, hey, it was bad. Think about that. A lot of times the recognition of your own poor behavior morally comes from within. And that is because we have, each of us, got a conscience. So what is the conscience? It's the thing that reveals to us our moral misconduct. And the word conscience, here's the spelling. The spelling of conscience is like C-O-N and then the word science, S-C-I-E-N-C-E, conscience. Not to be confused with conscious or consciousness. This is a common misspelling and a conflation between different words. Just being conscious is just like having brain activity and being able to perceive things. Like this marker has not got consciousness because it doesn't see, feel, perceive. It doesn't have a central nervous system or any kind of perceptual organs, unlike us. But conscience is like a moral concept, not just the ability to perceive, because like even little bugs have that. But conscience is the internal source of knowledge that human beings have about what's right or wrong. So that's the idea. It's an innate source of knowledge about what is right or wrong. Let me use a different marker. Okay, innate source of knowledge about what's right and wrong. That's the conscience. Now, innate means it's something inborn, born into us. It's naturally given to us by nature. But even though it's innate, it's something that can either be nurtured by our environment and our upbringing, or it can be neglected and left to become weak and ineffective. So in a way that's kind of similar to the ability that humans have to learn language, okay? Like a little baby that's born today, it's not speaking language yet. It's just making babbling baby noises, and it takes time, right? Before it's got enough experience with the linguistic community and the environment around it to pick up the language and really learn it. In the same way, some think that with your conscience, your ability to determine right from wrong, that's something that's born into you. But if it's not properly supported at an early age, it might not fully develop. And that happens too with language. There have been a few interesting cases that you can research of little children that were born and abandoned to the wild, like maybe left to die, but they actually survived because they were taken in by like a pack of like wild animals. There's this one case, it's not a joke, like a little girl was left to the woods, and she ended up growing up with like a little pack of wolves. And because of that, even though she didn't have any cognitive disabilities like Down syndrome or whatever, when they finally got back to her, she's now like a young child, and they found her, this feral child in the woods. And they tried to teach her language, but because she had kind of missed her chance at an early age when the language capacities are supposed to be developing in your developmental stages, she can never quite get it. She can never master language after that. And so in a similar way, if you don't have the proper kind of, I think, moral education and instruction, perhaps you can, not nurture the innate accuracy of your conscience. But it's there, and for most of us, it works. Of course, there are some that are like sociopathic serial killers and stuff that just could not feel anything. They could do the worst sadistic things to people and not care or even feel pleasure in it. So hopefully that's not like any of us. But the thing I'm trying to mention is that we should actually care a little bit about listening to our conscience. Sometimes people don't like that because they feel like it's a guilty feeling, and it's like, don't give me a guilt trip. But your conscience is just trying to steer you towards the right conduct. In pop culture, maybe you guys have seen like little cartoon images of like a little angel and a devil on a person's shoulder while they're trying to make a decision, and the devil figure's trying to get them to do the wrong thing, the angel figure's trying to steer them back to the right action. I don't want to over-rely on like cartoonish tropes and stuff to oversimplify things, but you can kind of think of the conscience as similar to the little angel voice in that common metaphor, because it's the part within you that's trying to notify you, hey, this is something that you should do or should not do, or that if you have done something wrong, it'll remind you that it was wrong and that you have a sense of regret. So effective moral reasoning requires that you listen to your conscience, not that you try to silence it, push it to the back of your mind, or just let it wither off and die. It's something important to us as human beings, and we should listen to it because it's simply trying to lead us towards proper conduct. Now from there, there's a whole extra set of notes on some moral sentiments. After that, there's a little discussion of the development of moral reasoning, and then we will talk about moral theories. So we got plenty of work still to go as we finish up chapter 9, but I think this is a nice, convenient breaking point as we've gone through a significant piece of material, and the next part kind of lines up well to begin with on Tuesday. So anyway, I think then that'll be a good enough starting lesson on chapter 9, and we'll resume on Tuesday after the weekend. Let me know if that's okay here in the chat. It's always good to see you guys, but for now, I think we'll be all right for today. If that's cool, let me know in the chat so that I can see that it's good, and then I can stop us for now. Make sure to follow up the titanium announcements that I'll send later so that you can see the written instructions for the 4th homework assignment. And if you need anything over the weekend, email me, but I'll be in touch also to tell you that I'm done with the grading of homework 3 and quiz 3 over the weekend. Okay then, thanks so much. Have a great one. And to all you guys, take it easy this weekend. I'll see you soon. Okay, bye-bye.